I think, I think maybe we'll get started. Jeff, are you gonna sit up front? Save a spot for me. I'll sit next to you. Great to see all of you. Thanks so much for being here and supporting the Ulrich and this amazing exhibition of work by Kevin Mullins. Come back often, bring your friends. The show's up through August. There's lots of time to share its beauty and its wonder. It's my pleasure, I'm honored in fact to introduce David Butler, who joined the Knoxville Museum of Art as executive director in 2006. And before that, as most of you know, he was here for about 6 years. And prior to that, he was at the Swope Art Museum in Terre Haute, Indiana, and before that, the Emerson Gallery at Hamilton College in Clinton, New York. He has taught art history at the University of Missouri in St. Louis and at Washington University in St. Louis. He earned a bachelor and master's degree in art history from the University of Florida and a PhD with a concentration in art, Italian art and architecture from the Washington University in St. Louis. He's a peer reviewer, God bless you, for the Museum Assessment Program and Accreditation Program for the American Alliance of Museums, and deeply committed to participating in arts and culture in Knoxville, serving on the board of the Art and Culture Alliance, the city's Public Art Committee, and the Historic Zoning Commission. David is also the past president of the Southeastern Museums Conference. And I'm going to add, David is one of 5 excellent essayists for Kevin Mullins' catalog that will be published and ready for distribution in June. We have a launch date of June 22nd, so we're inviting you all to attend that launch from 5 to 7. It's on a Saturday. David Butler is a highly respected professional in our field, and it is a great privilege to introduce him and also finally meet him. So welcome, David.
Gosh, thank you so much, Leslie. Are we good on volume? Can you hear there in the back? I'm really touched that so many of you would turn out today. I hope I won't disappoint you. That was a nice build-up, Leslie, and you've already revealed that I don't really have much training in talking about contemporary art anyway, but I will fumble around the best I can. I will confess that this has been an intimidating enterprise because generally when I talk about an artist or a work of art or a period or whatever, I'm talking to people that I know at least a little bit more than they do. And today I'm talking to a room full of people who knew the artist well and worked with him and loved him and socialized with him. And it has been kind of a surprise to me what a really difficult endeavor it is to think intelligently about and try to form coherent thoughts about someone that you really know, the person really intrudes in thinking about the work. And it makes me realize too that I think we talk about a lot of nonsense about artists that we don't know because we're kind of going on received wisdom or observations about them, and we repeat them to one another. And I've been amused and a little worried because what I thought was my profound discovery of a statement Kevin made about his art that to me kind of not explains it, but kind of gives us a clue about how to think about it. is on everything but a billboard coming in from the airport. I've seen it 14 times since I got here, and it 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 tells me that Kevin was an artist. He didn't talk about his art very much. He was making art, but and the things he said are very few, or at least the things that were recorded. And I was afraid, well, maybe there's a trove of information that I'm not seeing, or I'm not privy to, or don't have access to. But it became clear that he's a working artist. He's not a talking artist, and he chose his words well, and they really mean something. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The other kind of intimidating thing is that when you're thinking about an artist and trying to put their work into some kind of context and make sense of it, how does it fit with other things that you know about, and how do you evaluate, is it any good or is it not so good? Seeing all this work together in one place, beautifully installed, beautifully lit, is such a, my head kind of exploded, because I haven't seen it this way. Nobody has seen it this way. These are works that, and I'll talk in a minute, this is a detail from a little painting that Ted and I have in our living room that we've lived with for many years now, and we love it. And it's my little piece of Kevin that we commune on a daily basis with. And I would add too, I have a number of Wichita artists in our house, and I love each one of those works because it reminds me of the person and a really happy time in our life here at Wichita State and in Wichita. But anyway, there were kind of a whole swirl of emotions about working on this, and frankly, sadness, the fact that Kevin's no longer with us. Part of me wished I could have picked up the phone and say, "Well, Kevin, what about this? What's the deal with this?" I didn't want to bug Ann, so I didn't contact her very often. But I just want to start out with that caveat that this is it's a difficult endeavor to try to say something coherent and intelligent about someone that you knew and loved. Let me start out after that, basically telling you I don't really know what I'm talking about. I wanted to commend Leslie and the Ulrich for doing this show in such a big way and for inviting me here. Art museums in smaller cities, which is where I have spent most of my career, often lack the institutional confidence to promote the talent in their own backyard. It's especially tricky when the talent was a longtime member of your own staff. And it seems to me that it takes a strong sense of who you are, a lot of institutional self-confidence to celebrate one of your own. Profit without honor and all that. It suggests to me that Wichita and the Ulrich have reached a level of cultural maturity that enables you to feel comfortable embracing what happens locally, because you know it compares favorably with work from further afield and is the product of a sophisticated cosmopolitan ecosystem of art making, of which Wichita State is an integral part. I think you should really pat yourselves on the backs for having the kind of the wisdom and maturity to celebrate one of your own. My own museum has transformed itself from a place that 30 years ago, when it was founded, we wouldn't have dreamed of showing anything from the 500-mile radius. That just wasn't even part of the business plan. We've achieved remarkable success by focusing on the rich visual heritage of our own part of the world, of the southern Appalachians and East Tennessee. And in the course of that institutional shift, we've uncovered a long, rich, and diverse creative history that laid the foundation for the vibrant creative culture we enjoy today. This show is such a fitting tribute to what Kevin accomplished as an artist, to what he and Ann and Project Gallery have contributed to this community, what you do to support and lift up the local community of artists. So good for you, good for Wichita for celebrating your own. Noticed yesterday at the Wichita Art Museum that there were two beautiful works by Kevin right at the main entrance to the exhibition gallery. So it's wonderful to see that kind of widespread community support and collaboration. Grab my water real quick. I've been thinking a lot about Kevin's work since his death, and spent a good deal of time last fall cobbling together a short essay that will come out in the book that Leslie mentioned. And I took, because that's what I had to work with, I built that little essay on the little painting that we had in our house. There's a detail here, which is very misleading because it's a little tiny thing, and this makes it look gigantic. I think one of the things I've discovered about Kevin's work that tells me it's really solid and really good is that it works in any size and any medium. It reproduces well, although it's hard to photograph. And even this is one of my cell phone photographs, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And it was kind of a treat for me. It was a sad task because this is someone that we loved and missed, but it was a joy at the same time because as a museum director, they don't let me talk about art very much. I'm usually involved in conversations about air handling systems and building leaks and personnel issues and finances and fundraising. You know the drill. And this little painting, let me see. How do I advance, Leslie? Forgot to ask you that. Just hit return. Oh, there it is, okay. How about that? Got it, there. Here's the paint. Again, at gigantic scale, and I think that actually the panels are approximately the size of some of the smaller panels over here. And it's been fun. It's been one thing fun about seeing all this work together, as you can sort of see Kevin transferring screens and other materials that he used from one work to another, and you can see it used over time in different colors and turned backwards and upside down, and it's a fun exercise, and I love seeing all these small works on the wall here together. A productive exercise would be to sort of connect all the different places where he used the same actual screens for making these paintings. Another thing I've discovered in the course of looking at Kevin's work and thinking about what he did is the extent to which I would argue that a really good artist, whatever they do is good. They don't have off days. And this little, I wouldn't say it's a throwaway painting, but it's a small work compared to some of his gigantic work. You can pull just as much out of that small work that we have hanging in our living room as you can for one of his big monumental 8-foot long canvases or panels. There's a real consistency in approach and method and quality, and I think that's one of the hallmarks of a serious artist. And I consider Kevin very much a serious artist. It's also made me think about how you evaluate is something any good or not. I think that's a tough one for everybody. How do you match this up with the kind of the torrent of things that rush by every day? We think about the whole semi-chaotic flow of contemporary art. How do you make any value judgments? How do you decide, wow, this is good, this is important, this needs to be preserved, this needs to be shown? in one sense, that decision is made for us by institutions like the Ulrich that say, yes, we believe in this artist, we believe in the importance of his work, and I think this will start a process from this exhibition, from this publication. I think other good things will happen along the way too. It got me thinking about how do I think about the work of other artists that I didn't know? Is what I know about them equally valid? Because I really didn't know them as people. I've known lots of artists over the years, but I haven't known very many. I didn't work with them day in and day out for 6 years and socialize with them and drink beer with them and hang around their studio sometime. So it has stirred up all kinds of probably unresolved questions for me as I worked on this. Anyway, I hope I didn't get too much wrong as I was kind of contemplating this and acting on hunches and kind of scattered information I could get off the internet. And I'm sorry, I realize now that I'm here that I've probably been working as blindly as everybody else, so that makes me feel a little bit better. Here's Kevin's painting on the far right, just to give you a sense of the scale and context. It's not very big. I mean, I spent a lot of time thinking about and looking at and writing about a fairly small object. That gives you a sense of how it's one of a happy family of things in our living room, mostly by artists that we've known in different places that we've lived. As I said before, a number from Wichita. And it's something that we really live with in an intimate way, day by day. To me, it embodies the essence of Kevin's approach to image making. And I discovered there is, in fact, because I had nothing else basically, I was able to tease a lot of information out of this little group of panels. There are 4 9 by 12 inch panels. Let me go back to 4 9 by 12 inch panels that hang, depending on the mood of the owner, frame to frame as one rectangular unit. You could display them as a long horizontal row of pictures. You could hang them like this, kind of randomly on the wall. I don't know if there's a set way to show them, and I wish I had thought to ask Kevin about it. I don't know if he created these panels and then arbitrarily put them together, if he created them to go together. I still have a lot of questions that we'll probably never know the answer to, and Anne might be able to enlighten me later. Okay, there's a founding myth too, because I remember buying this at a College of Fine Arts event where artists and WSU artists had donated their work. Ted remembers buying it from Trish Higgins. So I don't know if Trish is here, but our versions of history are different. And Ted said we paid by the panel, so that tells me a little bit how Kevin thought about it. And one thing you can't get from this picture, but you can get from some of the panels over here, they're deep panels, maybe a 2-inch. It's a masonite on a 2-inch frame, and they're beautifully crafted. If you knew Kevin at all, he liked to come across as kind of a goofball and kind of a rebel, and the rules don't apply to me. But when he got in the studio, he was dead serious, and he was really he was so disciplined and careful and precise, and the objects he made, the stretchers, the frames, the panels are so beautifully done. And I've noticed that looking around at work, that to the extent that I've been able to, it carries through everything. He's very old school craftsman that makes these beautiful objects. And ours are on the face is masonite, but the masonite is over a piece of stretched canvas, which is folded around the box. If you've ever stretched a canvas, if you've ever tried to cover a box with canvas. It's really hard to do. You get this lumpy mess. It's really difficult. This thing is so tight and clean and precise. And again, I would encourage you to kind of look at the construction of some of these small objects here, and I think you'll get a better appreciation of Kevin's approach. It has to do with the way he makes images too, the kind of careful precision of his craftsmanship. Having worked with him for a long time here at the Ulrich, he was just as persnickety in terms of other people's art and how it was hung, how it was presented, how it was treated, and he really had a great touch with his own work and with the work of other people. You probably figured out just looking at the whole that the four panels are actually two different patterns or matrices done in different colors. There's this what I call a diamond or diaper or harlequin pattern, and which his basically a basic approach to art making. You'll see this all through the exhibition, is to use a very limited number of patterns, usually a silk screen that he overlays one pattern over another, changes colors, turns them upside down, does them backwards. You'll see for all the kind of color and variety and beauty that you see in these galleries, there's a very limited number of actual forms that are repeated. They're usually flipped or changed somehow, so you don't recognize how similar they are. But I was struck, even with these four little panels, how the kind of expression he was able to get out of this very simple, classic pattern of this kind of diamond shaped network in the screen, which is then laid over or under, and I can't really tell, a kind of a floral, a very delicate kind of floral pattern. It looks kind of like wallpaper or a fabric design. I'm not sure what it is. And any of these works pay careful study, because it's really hard to kind of reverse engineer how he laid down those colors and patterns. I really tried. I've spent a lot of time looking at this, and I can't quite get my arms around it. I've watched Kevin a little bit, but I don't understand enough about his working methods. I'm hoping in the course of working on the catalog that somebody that had spent more time actually in the studio will be able to kind of give us a step-by-step analysis of how he does that. I would draw your attention to, because it's more visible in the diamond pattern panels, starting with these very rigid, regular, precise patterns in silkscreen. He's able to vary the way he applies pigment, and I think this is alkyd or oil. I'm not positive which. Varying the pressure, squeegeeing over, sometime with a lot of pressure, sometime with less, to get lots of variation in this kind of translucent pigment that he's using. And I draw your attention to that because I think that's really the very heart of what he was doing, and kind of finding that balancing point between regular, precise, mechanical, commercially produced patterns and this sense of handcrafting and the movement and motion and intervention of the human hand, which he claimed to be working against, but I think he actually put it in there rather regularly. So kind of hold that thought for a second, and I'll show you the other set, the other pair, which clearly from the same matrix, which is a one in black Again, I think the black's on top. I'm not positive, and the other in a kind of blue and pink, kind of variegated pattern, color scheme, both on top of a kind of reflective metallic. I guess it's a metallic paint. I don't think it's actual silver leaf, but I could be mistaken. And this is where it gets kind of interesting in terms of what he's showing. The two panels I showed you before are just identified on the back as H number 1 and H number 2. It doesn't really mean anything. These panels are inscribed Gibweed number 1 and Gibweed number 1, Gibweed number 2. Gibweed, it turns out, is this wallpaper pattern by an English designer from the 70s. And I don't know if Gibweed is also, Gib is short for gravity bong. And I don't know if Gibweed really means something, or if that's just when you do a Google search that this pattern and pictures of bongs come up at the same time. But I'd like to think that there's a connection. And Anne, I don't know if this was a pattern y'all discovered in England years ago, or how it got to the studio. But I love the whole bong connection. So we'll just let that float out there. So anyway, this little painting again gives you, I think, a pretty comprehensive survey of the different things that Kevin did to make images. The way he would manipulate a very limited number of formal structures and vary them, switch them around, change colors, change the thickness of the pigment, vary what he did as he squeegeed pigment through these screens. And again, I think it's that balance between the mechanical reproduction and the activity of the artist, the person of the artist kind of intruding there. And I think there's a kind of tension there that you get in the best of Kevin's work. I think that's why it interests us. I think that's why we want to look at it, because there's never the sense that this was spit out of a machine, but there's also a kind of precision and regularity and well, there's kind of this love of infinitely repeated patterns, and the kind of pleasure that he took in doing something over and over and over again, but adjusting it and varying it just enough to keep it interesting, and always reminding you, just when you think it looks kind of mechanical, that an actual human being made that image. These things are, again, you need to see these in person, because you don't get that strong a sense of the kind of the mechanical versus human component of this unless you can actually see them in person and see through the layers that he has laid down there so elegantly. I'm struck by, as I look at these four little panels and look at everything around here, I'm struck by the kind of rigorous discipline that Kevin displayed, and the way he stuck with so few things for such a long time. Something I haven't done and hope to do, and I think it'll be more possible as more work gets published and we can kind of see things in their chronological context, is to get a sense of how long he used different patterns. If there's a history to that, if patterns kind of merge together for a while or used together. I noticed, again, I had more fun looking at this group of things over here. And isn't it great to have a lecture right in the exhibition? I love that. And if it gets boring, you have something nice to look at. there's that kind of discipline, for year in and year out over easily several decades. And he's always pulling a new rabbit out of the hat without introducing much new. He was always doing new things. And this is where I really would like Kevin to weigh in and talk about what he's doing. There are two kinds of artists. There are artists that talk a lot about their work. Some of them really understand their work. Some of them need to let us do it for them. The other kind of artist doesn't say much about their work, and art historians kind of appreciate that because we can't be contradicted with actual things that the artist says. And if you tried to have a serious conversation with Kevin, he would probably just deflect that with a joke. If you're really trying to dig in, like, why are you doing this, and why is this happening? And I don't think he was always really comfortable talking about. I think he would rather do it than talk about it. And but let me read you part of the statement that we've all seen everywhere, because that's all we have to work with. Because I think it is an important. It's an important idea for understanding what he was trying to do. Kevin says, my work is an attempt to illustrate transcendence. I believe that repetition is the foundation of clarity. That has nothing to do with the first sentence, but I get both of them. I think they stand there just fine on their own. The use of repeated patterns in my work serves the same function as a mantra does in meditation. I really like that thought. That makes a lot of sense to me, and it helps me it helps me understand what he's thinking about as he's doing these images. The techniques I employ give the work the appearance of mechanical reproduction. The diminished evidence of the human hand creates a visual purity. Let me read that again. I think that's the key sentence. And I don't actually believe him, but I think it's important that he said that. And the diminished evidence of the human hand creates a visual purity. And I think that's telling, because he's telegraphing that he wants us to see these as if they were mechanically produced, but he works against that all the time, and he always puts in those wobbles and irregularities and variations that remind you that a human being made this, and that kind of squares with my sense of Kevin and his personality and the kind of person he was, and appearing to be the kind of artist that he wasn't as a person, but in fact those are unitary things. Who Kevin was, Kevin the person, Kevin the artist are the same person, and we have to see those as the same thing. So I think it's good to go back to that statement, since again it seems about the only thing we have. I watched a long YouTube video. It was an interview with, I think, someone at the Salina Arts Center, if I'm remembering correctly. And I thought, oh, finally I'll get to hear him talk about his work, and I'll really have a new understanding. And it was just him telling jokes the whole time. And the interviewer didn't help. She was asking kind of funny questions, and it's very enjoyable. I would encourage you to watch it, but you'll get a much better sense of Kevin, but you won't get a great sense of how he made these things. So. I've talked a lot about this sort of mechanical versus human, or machine-made versus the imperfect hand of the artist, because I really think that's at the heart of understanding Kevin's work. I think it's at the heart of understanding how it fits into the bigger flow of the development of modern art, and then at what comes after modern art in the 20th and the 21st century. And I will spare you. I will not start with the origins of Babylon, this would be a really quick, dirty, horribly reductive, and probably unfair take on things, but it'll save us some time. One way you can think about the history of modernism in the classic sense of modernism is a kind of two parallel tracks that artists can choose. One is very expressionistic, where it's all about the person of the artist. It's about that person expressing themselves, communicating with us as other human beings in a kind of visceral way. The other one is very mechanical and machine honed and perfect. Those two modes of thinking about the way artists make art and what art means are two of the threads you can follow through much of the 20th century. Obviously, on the expressionistic side, the obvious example is someone like Jackson Pollock, who took this idea about as far as it could be taken. And I can so see Kevin in that pose. I think he kind of saw himself in that heroic way, the way that the isolated heroic artist doing his thing. And the obvious thing about Pollock is that the splatters and the lines and the marks that he made are really kind of a biography, that when you look at the painting that resulted, this canvas on the floor that he could actually be in, he could physically be in because it was on the floor, he could walk through it. It seems to represent a kind of an honest, primal, authentic sense of who he was, or who he was at that moment as he was making that. Here's an example of one of his really great paintings. And this caught on like fire because it's so easy to connect to Jackson Pollock, the person. When every time you look at a painting like this, you are looking over the shoulder of the artist as he creates it every time. And it's a wonderful kind of, you can kind of dance along with him as he moves around and slings paint. And it's a very satisfying kind of exercise to kind of get inside the artist's head and kind of feel him move and to create these very seemingly spontaneous and messy and kind of splattery gestures. The problem with all this and sort of the reason this Jackson Pollock represents in a way a kind of dead end and kind of the end to the development of modernism as we think about it in a certain sense, is that it's very easy for this to become very beautiful wallpaper. And that's what happened very quickly. It's one of my favorite pictures in the 50s where they're using that same painting as the background for a fashion shoot where the model's dress actually picks up the secondary kind of salmon tones in that painting. I'm old enough to one of my first memories is kind of a blonde pole lamp with a parchment shade that looked like a Jackson Pollock painting. And we were not, I see people nodding their heads, we were not a particular stylish household, but that kind of liberating, powerful, authentic expression that Jackson Pollock wanted to represent quickly became tamed and domesticated, and it feels authentic the first time. The 100th time, it feels like a rote performance. And we've learned, in fact, that whether it's Van Gogh or Jackson Pollock, people we think as being sort of completely loose and unhinged and responding in the most direct way possible. In fact, we're very calculated. And Jackson Pollock knew where to sling that paint to make these amazingly beautiful kind of compositions. So I think he believed that this was an authentic expression of self, and that was a really valid artistic statement. But it couldn't really hold up. I mean, I would take a Jackson Pollock any day. Don't get me wrong, but this idea that the gesture itself is the meaning of the work is a really important one. I'm a little bit younger than Kevin, not much, and when I was taking drawing and painting in college, and I switched art history later for good reasons, most of my instructors, and I suspect this was the case with him, were old abstract expressionists or young abstract expressionists. They were coming out of this this idea that art could be an authentic expression of yourself. And I was 17 years old, and they were talking about, feeling the chalk across the page and expressing yourself. And I was horrified. I wanted nothing to do with any of that. I didn't want to express myself. I in fact ended up going into art history, where I was much happier. But it felt inauthentic. It felt fake. I was like the acting students in chorus line that can't feel. They can't pretend they're going down the sleds. Like I feel nothing. And that was me, and I suspect that was Kevin. There's another kind of completely opposite mode of thinking about making things, creating things, vis-a-vis the role of the human being, of the artist, and that's minimalism, whether with a small m or a capital M. And I kind of randomly chose this this image by Donald Judd, just to stand for 1,000 different things, which I love just as much as I love abstract expressionism. Where it's the exact opposite, where you do everything you can to erase any evidence of the creator. For all I know, Donald Judd sketches on the back of a napkin and called the fabricator and said, "I want some pink plexiglass and some sandblasted nickel plate, and then hold it together with some tension cables." And you see how open. He doesn't try to hide the way this is held together. He lets all the innards show there. There's nothing here that suggests that a human being actually put this together. This could have been made by alien robots on the dark side of the moon, and that was the whole point. That in order to be valid, a work of art it couldn't betray the hand of the person behind it. Some beautiful things resulted. In the end, it was just as unsustainable as the other way, because it's just a step from here to conceptual art, where you just talk about what you're going to do and you're done. And as you purify the artist out of the process, soon there's no objects at all. And I think the way out of this impasse, which I think has a lot to do with the way that Kevin thinks about image making and repetition and production, and is a younger generation that came of age mostly in the 50s, that they kind of called bullshit on everybody, and decided that art can be whatever they think it should be, and particularly introduced a lot of mass-produced imagery from popular culture. Everything was fair game. It really, I think, was the salvation of the 20th century, because it just opened up so many possibilities. One of those that we call pop art, because the source of the images is popular culture. And I think this painting by Roy Lichtenstein kind of stands for, it kind of sums up what they were trying to do, and how they were sort of trying to get out of this impasse. If you're thinking about expressionism, the authenticity of what the artist does, or the purity of mechanical fabrication as the two poles, then they just kind of drive the truck of pop art right through the middle, and they don't care. They run over everything. To me, this really fascinating image is a kind of a tribute to Jackson Pollock and the idea that a gesture, a mark, can be a meaningful and authentic kind of content, that the act of mark making is the subject of art. But it's also a declaration that is such nonsense, and that this is clearly a mechanical reproduction. He puts the Ben-Day dots in there to make that clear. It's a really wet, juicy, sloppy mark, but you also know, I would say it's a brush stroke, and it's a brush stroke. We kind of see the quotation marks around it, and the kind of ironic wink that yeah, this is a brush stroke, but it's just a picture of a brushstroke, and I'm going to make it clear that this is just a picture of a brushstroke. And I'm not saying that there is a direct family, there's a direct succession from Roy Lichtenstein to David Reed to Kevin, but there certainly is a family of explorations of these ideas of the gestural versus the mechanical. We did a show at Kevin's instigation back here in the early 2000s of David Reed's work. Ulrich has a beautiful painting by him, which repays any amount of time of careful study. Here's David, kind of working in that same mode as Lichtenstein, where he's actually, you get a sense of the physical act of slathering on these paintings are really big, kind of troweling on these big patterns of paint, which he then he works against that by sanding everything down, smoothing it over, applying more paint, sanding that down. So you get this beautifully honed, polished surface where a lot of things, you get a sense of the physical activity of the artist, but at the same time, he's kind of taking one step back and making you realize the artificiality and the artifice involved in making those shapes. So he's trying to kind of find that balance between the gesture, the energy, the authentic laying down of the brushstroke, and then that kind of honed, machine, smooth, polished. I always think of when I see David's work, and sometimes Kevin's too, I think of car finish. You know, that beautiful smooth, enamel-y kind of surface that you get on new cars. Here's another. Another painting of David's, which I kind of grabbed at random because they're all so beautiful, to give you a sense how he layers on colors and one translucent layer over another, and this kind of arbitrary square cut out. So again, it's this kind of push-pull, random gesture versus mechanical polishing and smoothing. And gosh, they're so beautiful, and I understand why Kevin loved them. I think Kevin approaches that set of problems in a somewhat different way. I don't think he's son of David Reed by any stretch, but I think there's an important kind of intellectual and practical connection between those two artists. So I need to catch up with my notes here. So again, I think I'll finish up by just reminding you how I'm kind of excited by this discovery, I guess, because I started out this endeavor because I love Kevin, and who wouldn't? And it's been nice in the course of doing this to really confirm that he's an artist who really matters, that there are things in his work, there's a consistency in his practice, there's a kind of an intellectual rigor behind what he does that you find in the smallest, these little tiny panels that I live with and enjoy in such a, they give us such pleasure. As well as the big giant monumental pieces that you see outside. It is clearly the same. For someone who claimed to be editing himself out of the work, he's very much in there. And I think that's one of the nice things about his work. And it's been really nice to see so many things and to get that sense of him, that kind of here I am. I'm not here. I'm trying to rub myself out, but he's still very much present. And there's a kind of again a kind of tension and balance between the person and the art. And I think it's so nice where those come together in such a tense way in some ways. But I think that's where the interest. I think that's where the lasting value of these come. So I'm going to finish there. Do we have time for questions? So.
Thank you, David.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. They're at least this big, if not bigger. Yeah, he works on a very big scale. And he probably works on a small scale too. I think some artists are great on a big scale and not so great on a small scale. But Kevin, it doesn't seem to matter. Sometimes these patterns get really tiny and fussy, and other times he's able to work on a huge scale. Yes, ma'am. I don't know. I'm a font of ignorance when it comes to Kevin's work. So, but Ann can probably fill you in, or Dan Rouser. They've been at this for many months now. So, well, Dan. It's subtle. The best exhibition would be there'd be one work of art in the whole building that would really force you to focus just on that one, because that's when you see those kind of subtle variations from one section to another. Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, and Kevin. And I think that's where the sense of the maker comes through. Yeah. And what I haven't talked at all about color and how he uses color as an expressive mode, and it uses it so beautifully, and there's a real emotional kick to it. Yeah. It's a very Philip Glass thing too. These are like Philip Glass music that you can see. There kind of is, but then he'll shut you down as soon as something starts to look like something. Yes, ma'am. I'm not good at that, so let's do one more question. I would encourage you to just to study some of these things. Yes, ma'am. They start to look three-dimensional, yeah. Yeah. Um, it, Something else about Kevin's work that is pretty consistent, that his images are always objects. There's always a sense of the three-dimensional, they always have these thick sides, so you don't they never look like a window that you're looking into. They're things on the wall, and beautiful things. Yeah. Well, listen, go and enjoy the riches around you. So,